Welcome to Candid Conversation number 189. Today, talking about what's going on with all these sexual allegations that have taken place. I guess it's over the last year, maybe 2 years. It seems like it all started when Trump was running for president. They started talking about, things that he said, things that he did. Then after that, you've got all these people in Hollywood all of a sudden, and about how these actresses were sexually abused or molested or whatever. And then yesterday, Bill Cosby was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison because of sexual abuse of a woman. And apparently he's done this with many, many women over time. They call him a sexual predator. But what's going on right now, in addition to that, it's also going on in the political realm. Tomorrow, Brett Kavanaugh, who is the Supreme Court nominee, there's some person who's accused him of sexual misconduct, and now there's a second person who's come forward, and the person's supposed to testify tomorrow. And you may not have heard this, but here in Alabama, Alabama, I don't think, has had a Democratic senator in probably 30 or 40 years. It's a very Republican state. The majority is always Republican. In fact, I know when I was in California and have primary elections, you would have, or just regular elections, I should say, you would only have Republicans on a ballot. You wouldn't have any Democrats running for a lot of the offices because they know they don't stand a chance. They couldn't find a Democrat to run in Alabama. So it's a heavy Republican state. Well, what they did was they had this election for the Republican, Jeff Sessions. He was senator in Alabama, and then he became attorney general under Trump, and so then they had to replace him. So they had a special election for this. They had a Republican candidates ran, and the vote was split too much, so then they had a runoff election between the top two candidates, which was Luther Strange and Roy Moore. And then they had a second election, and Roy Moore won the Republican nomination. So then they had a real election where the Republican ran against the Democrats. The Republican Roy Moore ran against Democrat Doug Jones. Now, this whole time, if you know Roy Moore, he was the one who was judge of the Supreme Court in Alabama, who had put the Ten Commandments monument in the courthouse in Montgomery. This was at least 25 years ago, and the court ordered those to be removed. So he's known as a God-fearing man who wants to put God in government, and Alabama likes that idea. We like God in government. So they elected him as the Republican nominee for senator. And nothing but good things said about Roy Moore until just a couple weeks before that election against the Democrat, and all of a sudden there are these sex allegations that come out. And it happened 20, 30 years ago, long time ago. And multiple women came forth about how he had sexually assaulted them, and the result was Doug Jones got one, and he's the new senator. Like I said, first time probably 30 or 40 years we've had a Democrat senator in Alabama. They didn't bring up these allegations during the Republican nomination or during the runoff. It's just all of a sudden, 30-year-old cold case is brought up right when getting rid of Roy Moore doesn't mean we just have a different Republican, but it means we have a Democrat in office. So it shows the Democrats behind that, especially when you see that once the election was over, nothing was said about it. Nothing was pursued about it. I mean, if If these women were really upset about what he did to them, then why wouldn't they pursue a case? Judge Roy Moore actually ends up suing the women for defamation of character, and I don't know what's happened to that. That goes off the scene and everything. But I just think that's funny because that's exactly what's happened to Brett Kavanaugh. He's nominated for Supreme Court Justice. They do all these questioning of him. Everything's fine. All of a sudden, here's these 30, 40 years ago, people sexually assaulted him. He sexually assaulted them, these women. And they're trying to get him, basically what it is the Democrats are trying to get rid of people they don't like by making up false sex allegations. Or if there is some truth to it, they at least don't mention it until it helps them politically. Nothing's said about it before that time. It's just sort of like Jesus. They try to find a lawful way to get rid of Jesus, to crucify him, and they can't find it, so then they make up stuff and they have him crucified. That's what they do with Brett Kavanaugh, what they did with Roy Moore. You can't find legal ways to get rid of them, so you just make up stuff. Now, the reason I bring up all this is that, what does this have to do with the Bible? Because these are all about the Bible. The reason I bring it up is because it shows you the times that we're in. It shows you that what they're doing, and you may not realize it, but what it's doing is it's trying to elevate women over men. Men are put by God as the leaders over women. Paul talks about that when he talks about head coverings in 1 Corinthians 11, that the head of every woman is the man. And so women are not to be rulers over men. Wives are to submit to their husbands. Paul says, I do not suffer a woman to usurp authority over a man. The leadership role is men, and it's given to the men, and they are over women. That's what the Bible says. I know that's not popular to say today, but that's just what the Bible says. I'm not going to change the Bible just because it's not popular. And so what they're doing, the feminist movement, I think they're on the third wave or maybe the fourth wave by now, is they're trying to get women to be over men by whenever a man is supposed to be in a position of power, we bring him down with sex allegations. Now, I recognize in Hollywood, I'm sure a lot of that stuff is true. Or with Bill Cosby, that's probably true. I understand that. But those things were never pursued before. The things with Bill Cosby happened 30 years ago. I saw the 2020 episode, I think it was, or Dateline NBC, one of those. There were like 20 women on there. And those are just the ones who came forward. And they all pretty much have the same story. I don't doubt that Bill Cosby did those things. But no one ever said anything about it. And all of a sudden now, all these sexual abuse things are coming out. And I recognize that those things are wrong, that he should not be doing those things. However, God still has the position of a man being over a woman. And another thing is, women have their own way of usurping authority over men, which is more of a passive, a more crafty way, where they seduce men. Again, I'm not saying that's what happened with Bill Cosby or any particular instance. But women do the same thing that they accuse men of doing. It's just they do it in a more crafty way that's harder to recognize or harder to prove. Men are more willing participants than women are. Men are like dogs. Dogs are just happy. They'll go along with whatever you say. Women are like cats. It's got to be the way they want it, or else they're not going to go along with it. And so it's a very sexist way of going after these men because you don't see any women being prosecuted. You know, how they seduce men. No one does that. Because it's not about justice in this case. It's about getting the power for women over men. And again, you may say, what has this have to do with the Bible? It fits right along in with the downward spiral of sin found in Romans 1. In Romans 1, there are 3 steps in the downward spiral of sin. The first step is that they worship the creature more than the Creator, which translates into wanting to have men and women wanting to have multiple sex partners, committing adultery. And you see that, or premarital sex, and not really marrying, but having sex with multiple people. You saw that in the 50s with the free sex, free love in the 60s. And then it's very prevalent. You look at just sitcoms. I remember in the 90s, like Frasier was a very popular sitcom, very tame sitcom. Rated G or PG. It wasn't one of those ones considered bad sitcoms. He was with a different woman all the time. Seinfeld, same thing. Considered a very clean comedy, especially by today's standards. And yet you see him dating different women and sleeping with different women all the time. No big deal. So that's what happens in the first phase of the downward spiral of sin. Then the second phase is rampant homosexuality. And Romans 1 talks about that. Men with men, going against the natural use of the woman and working together with men, which is unseemly. The women also with other women. So there's rampant homosexuality. And then the third thing is that the long list in Romans 1, 28 through 32, where people just do whatever they want to do. Relative truth. They do whatever they desire in their heart, whatever they find is right in their own eyes. They're not subject to anybody else. And so the farther you get down that scale, the worse it is. And once you get to rampant homosexuality, that's when a society is pretty much lost. You see that in Sodom and Gomorrah. That it's the sexual sins. The Bible says the only sin that you can do against your own body is a sexual sin. And the reason is because when the two get together for sex, they become one flesh. It's not when you stand before a preacher or you stand before a justice of the peace and get married. Marriage, sex equals marriage in the Bible. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6, if I've joined myself to a harlot, know ye not that those who join themselves with the harlot have become one with the harlot? For two, saith he, become one flesh. So sexual sin, when you've already become one flesh with one person, and then you become one flesh with a different person, then you have sinned against your own body, because that first person is part of your own body, is part of your own flesh, and now you've joined yourself to someone else, which means that you've sinned against your own body by sinning against your first partner. And when you start doing that, then what you do is the natural check that God put in there of marriage and family is destroyed, because you're destroying the link of family, marriage, through multiple sexual partners. And the result is that you just do whatever you want to do. There is no, since you've removed all the checks, then the last check to remove is the check of your own conscience, and you remove that with relative truth, humanism, secularism, and then you just do whatever you want to do. You know, I can do whatever I want to do. And homosexuality, the reason that is so bad is because the main check of marriage is the fact that men and women think differently. So if you join yourself with a member of the opposite sex, then that member of the opposite sex will be like a second conscience to you. I mean, that's the main reason that married men and women, or even men and women that live together, argue about all the time, is because each one wants their own way. They're not willing to give up their own way, and they've devised a way, as a man or as a woman, whichever you want to say, to somehow do things that are wrong, but yet be okay with it in the conscience. But yet the other person, because they think differently, has devised a different way around it. And so then when you use your way, then the other person objects to it, because then it threatens their own way. And so that's why you've got all that, this argument. But if you've joined yourself homosexually to a member of the same sex, then the result is the check isn't as strong. There's still a little bit of check in terms of you grow up in a different household. But the main check is men and women think differently. And if you're a man joined to a man or a woman joined to a woman, that check is removed. And so the result then is you do whatever you want. That's why after rampant homosexuality takes place, then the third part is Romans 1:28 through 32. People just follow their own. God gives them over to a reprobate mind. Since they've rejected everything, God says, okay, you can reject the conscience then and just do whatever you want. So give them over to a reprobate mind and they do whatever they want. And at that time, the society has to be destroyed. And you see that with Sodom and Gomorrah, where the angels come to check out the city, and immediately it's all the men from every corner of the city come, and they just come and say, we want to have sex with those two men that came. Well, you know, the thing about what's going on today, I mean, isn't that a violation? I mean, just think of Bill Cosby or Brett Kavanaugh or Roy Moore or the Hollywood people, or whoever it is. Well, how dare you, you know, you're saying that, you know, how dare you put your advances upon me? You know, and you look at it, a lot of times, I know, just working in an office environment myself, I have to go to these sexual harassment seminars. And there will be women who claim sexual harassment, and, you know, it may or may not take place, I don't know. But a lot of times those claims, it's just a difference of interpretation. I mean, a man maybe was interested in a woman at work, but it doesn't mean that he harassed her. But because women think differently than men, in the woman's mind, she was being harassed. But in the man's mind, he wasn't harassed, didn't harass her. I mean, if she accuses him of harassment, he probably thinks, oh, you want harassment? I could give you harassment. That was nothing, you know. As men's actions are more overt, whereas women's actions are more subtle. There are plenty of women who do the same thing to men and trying to lure men in the workplace, but that rarely will you see a claim of sexual harassment there, because the women's ways of seducing men are more subtle, more crafty. It's harder to tell, harder to determine, harder to make a case out of it. The men's actions are just more overt. You're more likely to get money out of that or get a reprimand for the man. And so you have sort of a double standard just because men's actions are different than women's actions in trying to get what they want, because men and women think differently. I think this light is stuck, so I'm going to go through this gas station. Show them. So, oh yeah, now it's not stuck. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, that's what goes on. And the reason I bring all this up then is that when you get to the point where you punish men for having these sexual advances to women, then what you're really doing, and you're trying to get women to have power over men, I mean, that's the idea there. What you're doing is you're taking away the God-given role of a man to have authority over a woman. Should a man sexually harass a woman? Absolutely not. But in order to stay along with the role of men being over women, there should be a lot more leeway given to men in those cases than there are to women. And actually you see just the opposite. Women have a lot more leeway in today's society than men do. So a lot of that stuff that was happening, these allegations against Brett Kavanaugh or Roy Moore or Bill Cosby, those things weren't necessarily considered something that you would bring up and something that was maybe punishable back then. But now it is, because society's views about what is sexual harassment, what is abuse, and all that has changed. And so it's giving power to women, because now it's a lot harder to for a man to advance in a position of power, because all you do is, oh, well, he sexually did this 20, 30 years ago, and now he can't have the position. Whereas if you put a woman in there, that's not going to happen. You don't see the women being accused of sexual harassment or anything like that. So what this does then is it's a changing of the roles of women now being over men, usurping authority over men, rather than the men being over the women. And the result is that it promotes homosexuality. Because if I have sexual desires, just like any normal person does, and I can't exercise those with a member of the opposite sex because my career could be shot, somebody says I looked at them funny and now I lose my job, or I can't get a promotion because of that. And women interpret things differently than men do. So in order to fulfill, and we don't care about marriage anymore. We just have the loose morals of just sleeping with how many ever partners you want. So really, the only check against me, because marriage has been removed, and that's not in my conscience anymore to have that anymore, and homosexuality is legal now. And so the next step is for just everybody to pursue rampant homosexuality. Because then I can fulfill my sexual desires. It's not as good as with a member of the opposite sex, but it certainly is a lot less trouble, because I won't worry about sexual allegations, being accused of that. And especially with the homosexuals, they get preferential treatment as well, the LGBTQ community. And so they wouldn't dare, same thing that a homosexual did. Just like before, you wouldn't dare accuse Bill Cosby because he's a celebrity, so he could get away with all this stuff, which is why. But now it's changed. Now he can't get away with it. But if he was a homosexual, he could get away with it. Somebody like Ellen, for example, could be doing the same things that Bill Cosby was doing, and they wouldn't prosecute her because she's the poster boy for LGBTQ people. She's got her own talk show. So what it does then is I can fulfill my sexual desires, not as well as if I have a member of the opposite sex, but I can do it with a member of the same sex and not lose my job, lose my position. And in fact, I'm probably going to be promoted because the LGBTQ people get preferential treatment. So the result is the promotion of rampant homosexuality, and then we get to the place where Sodom and Gomorrah was, where these men, we talked about, you can't violate their Brett Kavanaugh did this, or Roy Moore did this, or Bill Cosby did this. Well, what about all the men from every quarter forcing their way into the house to have sex with the two angels? I mean, it doesn't seem like the homosexuals are concerned about the rights of those men. Why don't you at least ask them? Lot's at the door and says, oh, no, don't do that. That's a great evil. They're not interested in that. And they say, get away. We're going to kill you to get to him. So much for respecting other people's rights. So you see that it's not about respecting people's rights. It's about giving power to women, which will result in the rampant homosexuality, which results in a case like Sodom and Gomorrah. And then everybody does what is right in their own eyes. So this isn't a thing against Brett, I'm not doing this to defend Brett Kavanaugh or Roy Moore or Bill Cosby or any of these people. And like I say, if they did, they could have committed sexual sin in those cases. I don't know. God says his standard is much higher. If a man looks upon a woman with lust in his heart, he's committed adultery with her in his heart already. That's a much higher standard than the sexual harassment definitions in a workplace, or what you see going on with these high-profile people. But the issue isn't that. The issue is God has made men to be over women, and if a man tries to force his way onto a woman, although it's a sin and it may be wrong, we shouldn't punish that more than we would punish a woman trying to seduce a man. It's a double standard that's going on, and by doing that, we're not honoring the roles of man being over a woman, which results in homosexuality, because now we don't honor God's roles. We don't see the woman in her proper place and the man in his proper place. So now anybody can take on any role he wants, and the result, and it's not punished when you have homosexual behavior as opposed to heterosexual behavior, because a woman isn't going to interpret another woman's advances like she would a man's advances, and a man isn't going to interpret another man's advances like a woman's advances. And so you get rid of all the sexual allegation charges, and everybody can fulfill their sexual desires in a homosexual way rather than a heterosexual way. So then with that check completely removed, then marriage and family gone, then the result is rampant sin, Romans 1, 28 through 32. So it's just another sign, and I've said it before over the years, once homosexuality is accepted, all hell breaks loose literally, and that's what we see going on in society today. It's going to result in more homosexuality, with the women usurping authority over men, and then people just do whatever they want. I mean, we already see us into that last part, and we're already in Romans 1, 28 through 32 right now as a society, and it's just going to get worse from here on out. So that's the danger of what's going on in our society with these sexual allegation charges. Thanks for watching.